Hi there, it's Keith again from the Evangelical Free Church, Stony Stratford. And we're continuing our series in this book of Ecclesiastes, this book that asks really big questions. And we come to chapter 6, and in chapter 6, Solomon does a kind of summing up of what is seen so far. But it's kind of a selective summing up. I don't know whether you remember that program. It was on when I was growing up. Actually, I don't think I ever saw it, but I've sort of looked at clips recently to research this. That kids program, Mr. Ben. Remember the little guy in the bowler hat? He used to go down to the shop and he used to become, a shopkeeper would provide him with some costume and he would become whatever he wanted to be, whether it's a cowboy, an astronaut, a medieval knight. He could live that out. I can't help thinking that actually it's a bit disturbing. This guy must have had such a dull life that he had to escape into the realms of fantasy every so often. Mind you, I suppose it's okay in a sense. This is what we do as kids, isn't it? However, Solomon's been doing a bit of that here. He's in a sense been putting on the costume of a commoner. He's been looking at his government. He's been looking at his civil service and saying, well, actually, if I was on the other side of things, how would I see things? And he realises that even if he's a good king, justice is not always done. There's lower officials who may be corrupt. And life can be a pretty hard place for certain people. So as I said, he's really stepping back and he does an assessment of this very, very dark side of life. Just listen to these first couple of verses. I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on men. God gives a man wealth, possessions, and honor, so he lacks nothing his heart desires. But God does not enable him to enjoy them. And a stranger enjoys them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. Solomon takes a hard look and he says, for some people, and I emphasize for some people, and we'll see that as we go through the chapter, life can be so meaningless because everything you worked for, well, where does it get you? The meaningless here again is this picture of Hebel in the Hebrew, mist, vapor. And what's Solomon saying? It all amounts to nothing in the end. Some years ago, the group called The Verb had this hit single called A Bittersweet Symphony. And it had these words, it's a bittersweet symphony called life. Trying to make ends meet, you're a slave to money, then you die. A slave to the world. Now, that's a subject, a theme we've actually been looking at quite a lot in Ecclesiastes so far. God's gifts are good. We've got to backtrack a bit to get this chapter in its place. They are good. Solomon's admitted that. But you make an idol of them, or you don't give God his place, and that's what we were looking at last week, then, well, you've made a big mistake. Verse 3, a man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive a proper burial. I say that the stillborn child is better off than he. Whoa, that's pretty dark, isn't it? You see, the danger we have, all of us, is that we can become a slave to our covetous nature. Verse 7, all a man's efforts are for his mouth, yet his appetite is never satisfied. What advantage has a wise man over a fool? What does a poor man gain by knowing how to conduct himself before others? Better what the eye sees than a roving appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Again, he's using that Hebrew word again, Hebel, vapor. Everything that life seems to promise disappears. You can't grab hold of it. In the end, it's an experience, But what kind of experience? Well, there are ways we try and cope. We could try and perhaps create a philosophy. Verse 10, whatever exists has already been named, and what man is has been known. No man can contend with one who's stronger than he. The more words, the less meaning. And how does that profit anyone? One of my favourite films, because I think it deals with the expectations, disappointments, in a sense the covetous nature of life, is the film Hannah and Her Sisters. And one of the main characters in that film is basically a guy who ends up feeling suicidal, and he tries to commit suicide. It all goes wrong, and he gets out of his apartment. He's tried to shoot himself, and the gun's gone off, and then he's dropped it, it's gone off again. And so, people are shouting, and he's wondering what's going on. So he just gets out, and he wanders aimlessly around New York, and then he wanders just as somewhere to go into a movie house, and he sees a film that he's seen many times before. The film is actually a very funny film, Duck Soup by the Marx Brothers, and he muses and thinks to himself, look at those silly people up on the screen. Okay, life may be difficult, but hey, there's some bits to be enjoyed. Wouldn't you want to live and have the experience? Wouldn't it be good just to go round once? That is actually the sum of his philosophy. And actually, that's the way that most of us live, isn't it? We live for the moment. We say life's the greatest experience we're ever going to have. There won't be another one as far as we're concerned. So, hey, wouldn't you want to go around once? But really, that's pretty shallow, isn't it? Our eyes don't cut it. Solomon sums up like this: for who knows what is good for a man in life during the few meaningless days he passes through like a shadow? Who can tell him what will happen under the sun after he's gone? Do we make our mark in history? Some people do, but actually it won't do them much good when they're dead. They won't know about it, will they? It's a bit disappointing in the end. Solomon here, you see, has put another hat on. He really has sort of done the Mr. Ben syndrome. He's stepped back and he's now said, I'm going to imagine a world without God. And his conclusion is it's pretty dark. You could seek for meaning there. You could seek for meaning here, there, everywhere. In the end, does it add up to much? Well, is that what we're left with? Do we just shoulder the burden of life? Do we say, well, maybe we'll have a few laughs as we go around, a few good times? Or is there a way to approach what would be a very dark and disturbing experience? Well, the Bible must always be taken in the context of what we find elsewhere. And as we've been seeing in Ecclesiastes, Jesus is very much the answer to the big questions it throws up. And this is what Jesus says at one point when he's faced with how dark everything is, and the trouble and the spectre of death. This is what he actually says: I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, yet though he die, will live. There is a promise for the future. That might sound extraordinary. That might sound incredible. But Jesus, a man who preaches real wisdom, and more importantly, wisdom in the light of coming into relationship with God, makes that promise. There can be a future. There can be a purpose. There can be a reason to live for. Thank you for listening.